only a great subject is able to deeply arouse our humanity. While the mind is limited when it moves in small circles, man rises to meet his higher purpose. And now, at the grave end of the century, when reality itself becomes poetry, when we see the combat of powerful natures and battles are waged for the sake of mankind, for dominion and for freedom, now may art attempt upon her stage of silhouettes to soar yet higher. Aye, she must, should the stage of life not disgrace her.
What would Schiller say were he to see us today? The great cause of mankind seems more weighty. The world peace and freedom are at stake. The less favored part of the world is threatened with extinction for lack of development. Rabid Jacobinism is raging in the southeast regions of the world. It appears our entire civilization is in danger. Would Schiller today pass the same judgment he reached upon witnessing the Jacobin terror of the French Revolution, that a great moment has found a little people? It is in order to provide a more fortunate answer to this question that the International Schiller Institute has been founded. Its members in many nations share a fundamental belief in the reason of man, and thus the belief that even the greatest of crises can be solved. No one more perfectly embodied the humanist ideal of humanity. No one more effectively united the conception of republican freedom with the principle of poetic beauty than he. What Beethoven was for music, that is what Schiller meant for poetry. Schiller and Beethoven were the giants of the German classics, infinitely like one another in their method of thought, each having established the standards by which all art must henceforth be measured. Schiller was the great Republican poet of freedom who knew to adorn the ideal of a nobler, more beautiful mankind in such powerful language that he truly found an infallible key to the most secret accesses of the human soul. One eyewitness wrote about the premiere performance of the Maid of Orleans in Leipzig.
The entire square in front of the theater was choked with people. Then he stepped out. Voices ordered the hats removed. Then the poet walked through the crowd of his admirers, their heads bared, and they shouted, "There he is!"
Schiller exerted the most powerful influence on all positive developments in German history. The Prussian reformers von Stein and von Humboldt Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and many others were decisively formed by him. He was the mind that spurred them on in the wars of liberation. And yet, he also influenced the best minds worldwide, like John Quincy Adams, Edgar Allan Poe, James Fenimore Cooper, just to name a few. One must bring to mind the electrifying effect of a genius upon his fellow men in order to understand Schiller's effect upon history. Thus, the great humanist and creator of the best model of education, Wilhelm von Humboldt, who lived in Schiller's company for many years and was, with Goethe, one of the pillars of the Weimar classical period, writes about Schiller that there was none in that era more deserving of the examination of his internal intellectual life.
A great intellect can have no more direct and comprehensive effect than through his own works. These works, however, illuminate merely one part of his essential nature, which only flows back clearly and fully in living form, in a manner which can neither be proven in the individual case nor followed by thought alone. This is assimilated by his contemporaries and bequeathed to future generations. This quiet and almost magical effect of great minds is the principal vehicle by which an ever-expanding body of thought can extend ever more broadly and powerfully from one generation, one nation to the next.
Never did Germany come closer to Schiller's ideals than during the Liberation Wars, which were by no means merely a patriotic uprising against Napoleon's tyranny. Rather, they were simultaneously an enthusiastic Republican constitutional movement, spurred onward by no one so much as the great poet of freedom, Friedrich Schiller. Thus, the Prussian reformers used Schiller's history of the 30 Years' War in their battles against Napoleon. Gneisenau rehearsed Wallenstein's camp with his soldiers. Countless soldiers visited Schiller's widow to receive lines from his poem and kept them near their hearts to march, thus strengthened, into battle. When Schiller's writings were banned under the Carlsbad Decree of the reactionary rulers of the Holy Alliance in 1819, they were passed from hand to hand, and his popularity grew even more. He became the inspiration and hero of youth. His fame spread around the world, and in 1836, Germans from all over the world financed the statue made by Thorwaldsen, the first statue ever of a German who was neither prince nor military commander. The Schiller festivals in 1859 still stand as the most powerful positive political demonstrations that ever happened in Germany. In countless cities in Germany, in all of Europe, among the German emigrants in America and elsewhere, Schiller's memory was celebrated. In schools, universities, churches, even in factories, a loud call for national unity was sung. And it is certain that Germany's fate would have taken a far more positive turn had the country been united in the spirit of Schiller as a republic, rather than under Bismarck, which happened thereafter. German culture, and especially Schiller's popularity, exerted an important influence on America throughout the 19th century. The 100th anniversary of Schiller's death in 1905 marked yet another Schiller Renaissance, but it was the last time when German culture was considered a genuine ingredient of America's heritage, before it was largely repressed by Teddy Roosevelt in the First World War. But as long as America remains separated from Schiller by ideological barriers, it will also remain separated from its soul, for no other poet eternalized the ideals of the American Revolution as he did. Friedrich Schiller was born 225 years ago on November 10th in Marbach. And with his parents, Johann Caspar and Elisabetta, spent an extremely happy childhood there, later in Lorch, and then at the Latin school in Ludwigsburg. His happiness was only interrupted when Karl Eugen, the Duke of Württemberg, brought him into the Karl School, the Ducal Military Academy. Although Schiller suffered immensely, as he wrote himself, at this school where he had to stay from the time he was 13 to 21 years old, the influences which flowed upon him at that time became a wellspring of experience that would later be the source from which his poetic genius would explode. On the positive side, his mind developed under the influence, still felt in the 18th century, of Leibniz, Lessing, and Shakespeare, and among his teachers was one who was outstanding because he polemically challenged his students to develop themselves into geniuses, Friedrich Abel. Schiller developed a passionate aversion against the oligarchical despotism of the nobility, who brutally and thoughtlessly crushed the aspirations of their subjects, who carelessly destroyed an entire year's work of their peasants, if it pleased them to stage a hunt with 300 horses. Schiller had a sharp political insight with which he exposed the covert operations of the oligarchical faction in his various works, such as The Ghost Seer. In his first drama, The Robbers, written by the 20-year-old Schiller secretly while he was still at the Karl School, a dramatic talent erupted that has no parallel in the German language. While dramas greater than The Robbers were to follow, Schiller already demonstrated what it was that distinguished him from all other playwrights. the ability to compose in such a gripping way that each line is born by necessity of the previous one, so that it is impossible to put down one of his dramas, no matter how many times one might have read it. Not to speak of the overwhelming effect of his dramas performed on the stage, which only a fool could possibly evade. Schiller's fellow students, in any case, who secretly attended the first performance of The Robbers, excitedly played entire scenes at night in the woods. The Robbers established Schiller's fame throughout Germany at a single stroke, soon throughout Europe. When Duke Karl Eugen forbid Schiller to write, forbid him any contact with foreign countries, even arrested him so that Schiller must have thought he would share the horrible fate of the poet Schubert, he decided to flee. His good friend, the composer and late collaborator of Beethoven, Andreas Streicher, made a great sacrifice to help Schiller escape. Doubtlessly, these were the experiences that Schiller worked up in his third drama. Cobbles and Love is the first play in which Schiller makes direct reference to the American Revolution. Not only did he put the entire duplicity and perfidy of contemporary life at court ruthlessly upon the stage, here he attacks the sale of Hessian soldiers to the English, who were in the habit of throwing such soldiers as cannon fodder into the war against the American patriots. Cobbles and Love was to remain Schiller's last drama to so drastically make reference to the present time. The play was immediately forbidden after the premiere performance. In order to escape censorship in his late dramas, Schiller used the trick of shifting the great affairs of the present to earlier historical times. Whatever he wrote from then on, whether dramas, poems, historical or theoretical works, they were all born by the great idea of political freedom. And they all mirror the ideals successfully realized in the American Revolution, ideals that united all the ardent patriots of Europe. The famous Rütli Oath from Wilhelm Tell was directly taken from the American Declaration of Independence. When Christian Gottfried Körner helped Schiller out of personal difficulties, as he had many other Republicans, he was filled with optimism about the future of mankind. It was in Körner's house that Schiller composed the famous lines,
Freude schöner Götterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium. Wir betreten feuertrunken himmlische dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng geteilt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weilt.
This poem appeared in 1786 in the very decade when all of the Republicans of Europe gazed, full of enthusiasm, upon the successful American Revolution, a success in which they had a large share through the networks of Franklin, Washington, Lafayette, Steuben, and the League of Armed Neutrality. The American Revolution had really been their joint project to establish for the first time a free republic in the New World. They hoped that the beginning of the French Revolution would take a similarly happy turn, and that this would be the lever for all of Europe, and thus for Germany too, which still consisted of 300 small principalities, to become nations. Schiller describes the discussions about this perspective in the Letters on Don Carlos as the favorite topic of the decade, the establishment of a nation wherein the utmost flourishing of the state coincided with the maximum development of the individual. Don Carlos, together with Wilhelm Tell, is probably the drama representing the most direct celebration of the American Revolution. When the Marquis of Posa in Don Carlos takes the side of justice for the province of Flanders, this emissary of mankind speaks the words expressing the ideals that also moved the founding fathers. Schiller's dramatic method was to educate patriots who were at the same time world citizens. In the prologue to The Bride of Messina, he adds,
True art, however, is not intended as a mere passing fancy. Its earnest endeavor is not to transport man into a mere momentary dream of freedom, but rather to make him actually free, and to do so by awakening, exercising, and developing within him his power to achieve an objective distance from the sensible world, to transform it into the free work of our own intellect, and through ideas to exert dominion over the material world.
In another place, Schiller says,
The stage is the common channel in which the light of wisdom streams down from the thinking, better part of the people, and flows from thence outward in softer beams through the entire nation.
Schiller was not only the greatest German dramatist, he also developed a philosophy of history that has not been surpassed to this day.
All previous generations have labored to bring about our epoch of mankind. All the treasures that labor and genius, reason and experience have brought forth in the long history of the world are ours. Who among you could bear this immense responsibility in mind without wanting to pay that debt to future generations that he can no longer pay to generations past? A path to immortality is open to those who merit it, where the deeds live on into future generations, even if the name of its author remains behind.
In the same year, 1789, as Schiller delivered his first address as professor of history in Jena, he composed the poem The Artists, a hymn to the reason of man.
Wie schön, o Mensch, mit deinem Palmenzweige stehst du an des Jahrhunderts Neige. In edler, stolzer Männlichkeit, mit aufgeschlossenem Sinn, mit Geistesfülle, voll milden Ernsts in tatenreicher Stille, der reifste Sohn der Zeit, frei durch Vernunft, stark durch Gesetze, durch Sanftmut groß und reich durch Schätze, die lange Zeit dein Busen dir verschwieg. Herr der Natur, die deine Fesseln liebet, die deine Kraft in 1000 Kämpfen übet und prangend unter dir aus der Verwilderung stieg.
In 1789, Schiller was firmly convinced that mankind found itself on the eve of the Age of Reason. The more the Jacobin terror crushed the hopes of the French Revolution, however, the more Schiller vented his horror at this barbarity. And Schiller, who had just composed the lines, "How beautiful, O man, with your palm branch, you stand upon the waning of the century," later reflected upon the Paris massacre in the Bell. Yet the most terrifying of terrors is man in his folly. The course of the French Revolution occasioned Schiller to the famous dictum that a great moment has found a little people. The hope of realizing a political order established on the principles of reason and freedom was gone. Schiller concentrated on the question of how this little people was now to be educated. In this period of the early 90s came Schiller's struggle with the work of Kant, who, with his categorical imperative, demanded that man must do his duty should a contradiction between necessity and inclination arise. Such a Kantian approach necessarily aroused the indignation of our freedom-loving poet, and so he wrote, "What crime have the children of the house committed, that he only takes care of the servants?" Schiller counterposed the idea of the beautiful soul, the emotion where reason and sensuousness, duty and inclination coincide. Friedrich Schiller died too young on May 12, 1805. There were so much more, infinitely more to quote from Schiller, so much more to say about him. Yet this brief sketch is really only a stimulus for those who wish to read and study Schiller themselves. Just as Schiller held forth the program of classical art against the endangered and crushed mankind of his time, reaching back to the heritage of the Greeks, today, we too must link up with the ideal of mankind of the Weimar classics in order to unfold anew the whole of human nature with Schiller's method. If we put all the confusion of later history to one side and prove ourselves to be the honest discoverers who Schiller once hoped for, we will thereby have found the key not only to overcome the inner fissures of modern man, but rather, if we learn to think as great as Schiller, we will also have found the strength to master the great causes of mankind today. Great is he who overcomes the terrifying. Man is greater than his destiny.